So this is the second part of helping behaviors, the slideshow in companion to the PowerPoint presentation for this week. So I've already covered this story regarding the Good Samaritan, so I'm not going to give it a lot of airtime. So folks can go back to our previous videos and look over my reflections on it, and I've given a little bit of reflection on the slide here. But I would like to go a little bit deeper into. I don't want to put one faith up over another, or one spiritual tradition up over another, because that's not a proper thing to do. Uphold your own up over against and make it superior to others. So I did go to seminary, and I have studied a lot of other faith traditions, a lot of other spiritual traditions. So I want to make sure that I give equal time. This was one of the books that I used to help me understand the Hebrew Bible, which Christians may know as the Old Testament. But I think, and sometimes the books are not always exactly the same depending on the canon that's used. But I want to take a look at the hospitality of Abraham. One of the good stories throughout the Hebrew Bible, and one of the big themes for Judaism is the theme of hospitality, and that's illustrated in Abraham. And this fundamental story really starts what I perceive to be the tradition throughout, and even throughout the whole the Hebrew Bible. So if you read through, and I took the translation from the Jewish Study Bible. So Yahweh, or the Lord, appeared to him by the terebinth or oaks of Mamre. He was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. Looking up, he saw 3 men standing near him. As soon as he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them. And bowing to the ground, he said, "My lords, if it please you, do not go past your servant. Let a little water be brought. Bathe your feet and recline under the tree, and let me fetch a morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourselves." Then Abraham ran to the herd, took a calf, tender and choice, and gave it to a servant boy, who hastened to prepare it. So again, he killed the fatted calf and brought it to some travelers. So if we're just hearing that, it really doesn't strike us as too. So what? Okay, so Abraham's a cool guy. He helps these travelers. Maybe he's believing there's a reciprocity, or that they'll somehow grant him something better. But really, Abraham was being obedient to what, and I think that a lot of scholars will attest to the obedience of Abraham, especially considering the later episode with his son Isaac. But I think that you're also witnessing a theme that's going to emerge throughout several of, and again, I think throughout, especially when you get to the prophets, the latter prophets, the major prophets. And so if you're in that sort of setting, if you're out in the, think about being camped in a tent, 2 or 3,000 years ago, and out in the middle of nowhere, and you're just there with your wife and maybe a few servants, and 3 men are traveling. And so it's this idea of travel. And there was always a suspicion of the stranger, because people were tended to be landed. We have a misconception in our modern world that people just up and go, whenever we want to. We have our cars, we have our airplanes. And so the sense of travel and the ability to move about is really exaggerated here in our culture, where people were tended to be landed. I mean, even a couple of 100 years ago, I would say even 100 years ago, your survival depended upon your daily ability to provide food for yourself, to provide shelter for yourself, to tend to your crops, to tend to making food, to tend to just the basic fundamental components of surviving, which is, it's hard for us to grasp, because we go down to the store, get a sandwich. Well, used to be we'd have to grind up that wheat and make it into bread, add some yeast, however we're going to prepare it, unleavened, whatever, it's going to take a long time to prepare our food to eat. And that was basically what our survival was. We have tons of leisure time now. Well, some of us really work a lot or stay on our phones a lot, but it's very far removed from what we do now is very far removed from the vast majority of human existence. And so this story reflects a person out on, considered a plain, grazing with herds of animals that help that person survive, that person's family survive, and servants. And here come three strange travelers. Are they going to have clubs? Are they going to have weapons? Are they going to beat me to death? Are they going to take my wife? Are they going to take my goods? And so rather than stand up with aggression, say, pick up a club and say, hey, get the heck out of here. You guys, I'll get my servants. We'll come after you. Because that's what the temptation would be. Because you never know. People who aren't landed, people are traveling. How is that person surviving? That person's probably a robber. So instead, Abraham throws himself at their feet, offers to wash their feet off, and offers them this feast, kills the best of his flock, of his herd, and brings it to them. And so you have this gracious offer of hospitality. Immediately following this episode, the three travelers go down to Sodom and Gomorrah. And, you remember the story now. And Abraham pleads for them not to destroy. And so they said, if we can find a certain number of good people down there, we won't. And so you have this hospitality starts out here, this gracious hospitality shown by Abraham, and then contrasted by when the three travelers get to Sodom, they're going to be raped. And a lot of commentators say, well, the folks of Sodom were homosexual. No, that's not what's being illustrated here. It's rape. It's a dominance. And I'll show you in just a moment. It's not really, that's irrelevant to the story. What is relevant is that these folks were openly hostile. You don't just travel in to Sodom and expect, we don't accept outsiders. Are you three spies? Or you three just coming to infiltrate our city so your army can come later and besiege us? So very suspicious, very, and so we read it through our eyes that, well, it's making a commentary on sexuality. No, really view it more through the lens of, say, like prison sex, where, people are raped out of dominance, and really just more the theme of rape is a better lens for interpreting this story. And so there are several references, but I picked one from Ezekiel to follow back up on the sin of Sodom. Only this was the sin of your sister Sodom, arrogance. She had her daughters, had plenty of bread and untroubled tranquility, yet she did not support the poor and needy. And so sometimes travelers may just be poor and needy. They're not there to try to take your goods, to beat your head in and steal what you have, because these travelers were not supported. And so you have this hospitality of Lot, and Lot is spared. Lot is spared due to the hospitality. Anyway, so I think that's important for us to notice. There are other writings about helping others, Hindu and Buddhist writings. So I have the copy of the Bhagavad Gita, the Gita at home. So again, I studied a lot of these faith traditions, spiritual traditions, in hopes of illuminating more about just humanity. So a big theme of the Gita talks about acting selflessly. And I tried to pick out one particular quote from chapter 3, act selflessly without any thought of personal profit. That speaks volumes to altruism. Do not be attached to the outcome. Don't be concerned about a reward. I think that there is the theme of karma that you encounter in Hinduism, and you're really wanting to avoid karma. You really just do things out of your duty, which they consider to be dharma. And I also picked out a Buddhist monk who I have a couple of books here from Thich Nhat Hanh. Again, these were books that I read when I was in seminary. But I'll tell you a little bit about Thich Nhat Hanh. He was a monk, a Buddhist monk in in Vietnam during the Vietnam War and witnessed a lot of atrocities, witnessed villages being just completely wiped out, men, women, children, elderly, everybody. And he was doing a lot of work to rebuild. In other words, you're just rebuilding bamboo huts, nothing with, mechanical assistance, usually just hand hard labor. So as a Buddhist monk residing in Vietnam during the 60s, he witnessed a lot of suffering and yet maintained faithfulness to his spiritual tradition. So following situations witnessing innocent people dying, he wrote, many young people wanted to forsake their practice of nonviolence. That's one of the central tenets of Buddhism, and join the National Liberation Front, picking up a gun in order to fight the Americans. And yet he counters with the thought that we are not born to hold a gun, not born to hold a gun. We are born to love. Love is the only weapon we carry. Going on into a different book, that was from Creating True Peace, and this is more from Peace is Every Step. When discussing empathy and acknowledging the interconnectedness of all people, Han wrote, if we want to understand a person, we have to feel his sufferings, or her sufferings, suffer his sufferings and enjoy his joy. To understand, to comprehend, means to pick it up and be one with it. There is no other way to understand something. In Buddhism, we call this kind of understanding non-duality. So just understanding in Buddhism that everyone's connected, that all life is connected, and that when we injure ourselves, or when we injure others, we actually injure ourselves. I think that goes a long way to what we talked about this week with altruism and helping behaviors. And for the last kind of thought here, helping is largely determined by people's internal versus external disposition. So recall at the very beginning of the course where we were discussing dispositional versus situational attribution. Do you consider that to be a character flaw, or do you consider them to be kind of at the mercy of their environment? And so that can be a very strong predictor of whether someone actually helps or not. So a person that has an external or situational attribution, that's just the person's situation, they're more likely to experience an emotion of sympathy, which will then lead to an action of helping. Versus somebody who dismisses that person, well, it's because they're lazy, or it's because, if they would have just done something different, they just must be dumb because they don't know how to help themselves. That's internal. That would be a dispositional attribution, which leads to no sympathy, which leads to no helping. So I hope these ideas can help you formulate your discussion for this week, and I hope that you found this chapter beneficial. So with that in mind, I hope that you have a good week, and if something comes up that you don't understand, please email me and I'll help you out. So take care, look for those exams. I hope to get them graded here at the first part of the week. See ya.